Are you currently single and happy, living your life and feeling fulfilled, but feel pressured by those around you to couple up and get married? Or are you single and unhappy, looking to find a partner and either get married or at least be able to say that you're part of a couple? Well, tune into today's episode. We'll discuss the book Singled Out by author Dr. Bella DePaulo. Hello, this is Alisia Young, and welcome to Teach Me Freedom. This podcast is about learning how to live a freer life from authors, entrepreneurs, and experts, those who have done it and who teach others how to do it as well, and what it feels like while applying those methods to our lives along the way. Every episode will deliver resources, anecdotes, and/or reviews to support you in living a more freedom-filled life. Let's jump in. Hello, Freedom Finders, and welcome to the first episode of our third season, Marriage and Motherhood, Are They For Me? And in this episode, we'll be discussing the book Singled Out, How Singles Are Stereotyped, Stigmatized, and Ignored, and Still Live Happily Ever After, written by Dr. Bella DePaulo, PhD. In this episode, we'll talk a little bit more about the book and also what led to my interest in the book, a few of the key ideas that I took away from reading this book, and some personal takeaways from this book, along with any critiques, if applicable, and what will be next for the podcast. And before jumping in, I'd like to start by setting the tone with a situation that kept coming to mind for me when I was reading this book and preparing for the episode. I went to a store to purchase some items and happened to bump into a childhood friend. And we hadn't seen each other for at least 10 years. And when we bumped into each other, it was of course wonderful to see each other again, and we started doing the whole catch-up thing. How have you been? How's your life been? Have you been accomplishing the dreams that you set out to? How is your love life? How is your career? How is school, if applicable? Do you have any kids? Are you married? That kind of thing. And it was exciting to quickly catch up on what has happened in both of our lives. What stands out to me is a part of the conversation when I shared I graduated from school, and I can't remember what stage I was in that particular career, but I hadn't gotten married. I did not have any children. I was still figuring all this stuff out. And so I remember they kept asking, oh yes, and what else? And what else? And what else? And I kept saying, yes, so this is my life. And I've shared, I've graduated from school, I'm blah, 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 whatever. But it just felt like they were prying of, oh, so do you have any person in your life right now, especially that they shared their marital status and that they have children. I remember feeling a sense of being lesser than, not because they said anything directly to me, but because I have not reached that stage in my life, feeling like that needs to be a stage in my life. And in that moment, I did feel behind, because I'm like, I'm not even in a relationship. I do not have any children. I don't even know if that's going to happen for me. So that situation stood out for me as I was reading this book and preparing for this episode. So clearly I fell into that category of single and unhappy, but that intensified that feeling. And I know I took that feeling away for a few days after that interaction. So this book is written by Dr. Bella DePaulo, and she has a passion for writing about singlehood. And she is a social scientist with a PhD in social psychology, and she has written extensively on this topic. The purpose of this book was to explore myths related to marital superiority, also termed matrimania. And in this book, Dr. Bella focuses on debunking many myths that are related to singlehood. She talks about benefits of getting married, and what we hear are the devastations of staying single, and also talks about unfair treatment that people who are single experience at work, in society, and also in other areas of life such as economics and in law. There are many reasons I was drawn to this book. The first being just an evaluation of life and reflecting on that experience with bumping into a childhood friend and thinking that I really believe that I would have been married by this point in my life and also with children. I mean, for some reason, I always imagined myself having like 10 kids and 10 pets, but we'll talk about that in another episode where we focus on parenthood. And also looked at a lot of my efforts to try to increase my likelihood of getting married. For example, trying to increase my attractiveness to potential mates. This looks into things like weight loss efforts along with getting highly educated and constant self-development. Another reason is straight up FOMO, so fear of missing out and fear of being left behind. I've noticed that over the last several years, I feel like I am not as able to relate as well to my friends who've gotten married and who have children, and I wanted to see some of the thoughts they may be thinking about me, not necessarily in malicious ways, but maybe these are the things they're thinking when we're trying to make plans and they're not happening or they keep being pushed forward. And I wanted to be able to be understanding and gracious as a friend for how their lives are definitely different from mine because of these changes. Another reason is because of feeling brainwashed and just in noticing that in society, there's always going to be ideas that are pushed upon us and there's going to be propaganda surrounding that. And there's going to be different sectors or different industries which support certain narratives. And before reading this book, I didn't really question why I imagined myself being married with kids versus not. So this has been helpful for starting that self-reflection again, and also curiosity about what are the perks and benefits. Now let's head into some of the key ideas that I took away from this book. And I want to emphasize always that the key ideas I take away may be different from the ones you take away, but my goal is to share my experience and have a conversation if it resonates with you, and also to inspire you to read the book if you feel that this has sparked an interest for doing that. The first key idea was observing the centrality of marriage in different segments of society. The second was looking at that idea of conventional wisdom and the mythology of marriage. And the third was being educated on how marriage has changed over time. So now we'll look into each of these in more depth. So the first one being the centrality of marriage in segments of society. Some of the sectors of society that Dr. Bella touches on include media and advertising, law, politics, economics, different religions, and specific industries such as the real estate industry. When it comes to media and advertising, there's so much that is being thrown at us, at our subconscious brain, that we may not even be aware of, especially if it's a consistent message across different advertisers. Hearing about this specifically in the real estate industry hit home, partly because of the conversation that we had with Dr. Enoch earlier in the podcast about becoming a first-time home buyer. It was interesting to hear about language that's used with potential home buyers or renters, and also decisions that may be made by certain realtors that wouldn't be made in other contexts. An example is that when it comes to purchasing homes, couples and families are seen to be more stable and multidimensional than those who are single. However, there's a quote that really goes to show that this may not be the case, and it starts out on page 75. It says, "More households consist of single people living alone than of mom, dad, and the kids. The millions of single people in contemporary American society include more than just the very young singles who may not have the financial resources to buy a home, and the older singles who may not want to care for one. As of 2004, 39.8 million people who were divorced, were widowed, or had always been single were between the ages of 30 and 64, and they are not hiding in apartments or pads. Singles are one of the fastest growing group of people buying homes. They account for more than 40% of first-time home buyers and nearly 30% of repeat buyers. Increasingly, they are renovating homes and even buying second homes. No matter, even when a single person can obviously afford a great home, that will not be the storyline. So that speaks to the narrative that's pumped out and even the actions that some professionals may follow. They may have somebody who is single and wanting to buy a property on their own, maybe a property with multiple rooms, maybe not for children, maybe for future children, or maybe not, maybe as a guest room, as a home office, or a place to work out. But there have been times when realtors will instead show their client different properties from what they're seeking, maybe smaller properties from what the client has requested. And so what I understand that to be is a form of not serving your client and using your own bias to inform the decisions on behalf of your client. In terms of law, there is legislation that favoritizes those who are married over those who are not. This was something I really wanted more information about. Well, what are some of the tax benefits that people who are married get that those who are single don't? I'll reference an article from a website, Remitbee. Some of the benefits that are mentioned include a spousal tax credit, along with pooled medical expenses, charitable donation tax credit, different transfers, and dependent status, along with benefits to RRSPs, which are registered retirement savings plan, and investment dividends. So these perks definitely make sense because part of being married is pooling resources. So I'm not saying that I disagree with the perks that are gained when people are married, but I also believe that there should be something in place for people who are single and maybe don't want to get married or do not have the opportunity to get married because it feels like there's potential perks that they're missing out on just because they're not married. In terms of politics, there was an example shared about how when it comes to people running for office and leadership positions, they're taken more seriously and taken to be more competent if they are married and have children versus if they don't. That is a form of prejudice, as prejudice is a preconceived opinion which is not actually rooted in fact. It's this common idea and common perspective used against certain people to prevent them from moving in a certain direction. When it comes to economics, Dr. Bella really breaks down some of the different advantages that people who are married get that people who are not married do not get. And individually, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but when we put them all together, we see that there is a lot that people who are single are not receiving. So there is a quote that I wanted to share, which talks to this point a little bit more. And so it starts on page 232, but I'm going to jump around. As with the social slights, many of the individual economic disadvantages do not seem all that consequential when considered one at a time. When I walk into a supermarket and pay a higher price per unit for the smaller package, I am subsidizing all my fellow shoppers who are buying the more reasonably priced jumbo packs. In any one instance, though, I'm probably talking about cents rather than dollars, but what am I talking about over the course of a lifetime? If I stopped for dinner by myself on the way home, I could not use the 2-for-1 coupon, so I ended up subsidizing all the couples in the restaurant who did get their discounted meals. Maybe I drove to the restaurant in a car for which I paid higher insurance than the married couples. If I wanted to stop at the gym after dinner, I'd probably be paying more for my membership than each member of a couple would. Same for hotels, cruises, and so much else. Add the extra salary for married men, the discounted health benefits for many spouses, the greater social security options that currently married and ever married people often have when they reach retirement, and the lower tax bill that married people pay, and the economic disadvantages of being single in contemporary American society no longer seem trivial. In fact, it seems inconceivable that people who are single could, at least on the average, do as well as married people financially over the course of a lifetime. And indeed, they do not. People who are single for life never do get any of the money and prizes awarded other people simply because they are married. A nationally representative survey of nearly 10,000 pre-retirement adults aged 51 to 61 included an assessment of each person's total wealth, including stocks and bonds, cars, homes, businesses, and everything else minus any debt. Men who had always been single had 61% less wealth than men who had been continuously married, never divorced or widowed. Ever single women had 86% less wealth than continuously married women. Divorced people end up disadvantaged too. Adults who reach their 50s, divorced from their first marriage, and not remarried have spent some of the years of their adult lives collecting marital manna, but they have spent other years losing it on the expenses and sequelae of the breakup. Divorced men end up with 64% less wealth than their ever married age mates, and women with 79% less. Up to at least age 61 then, financial fortunes are more closely tied to marriage for women than they are for men. People who are already widowed and not remarried by then, though, are the exceptions. Both the men and the women have about 53% less wealth than continuously married people. The Social Security system has been remarkably successful in reducing the overall rate of poverty among the elderly. Because women typically outlive men, most old people are women. Even with their pensions, though, widows are not always protected from poverty. Some have spent down their savings in caring for a dying spouse. Past the age of 70, about a quarter of unmarried women of every variety, so widowed, divorced, and ever single, are living in poverty. People who have fewer financial resources, such as people who are single, are less likely to purchase health insurance. Single people also do not have the option of getting coverage under a spouse's plan. As a result, they may be more likely to put off visiting a doctor for a troubling problem, perhaps waiting until the condition worsens and becomes even more expensive to treat. Then, once singles do access the healthcare system, they may be less likely than married people to receive the highest quality of care. Considering all the financial and psychological benefits that come with getting married, people who have crossed the marital threshold really should be much happier and healthier than people who have been single and stigmatized all their lives. But as Dr. Bella has mentioned in Chapter 2, getting married does not seem to have dramatic implications for health or well-being. Instead, people who are single, especially women who've always been single, often do just fine. There is an intriguing juxtaposition here. Single people are stereotyped, stigmatized, marginalized, and ignored, yet they often live happily ever after. Single people start out as targets of discrimination, but they do not end up as hapless victims. Their lives, in many instances, are instead sparkling examples of psychological strength and resilience. So that portion of the book kind of summarizes some of the areas that we're seeing a lack of balance between people who are married versus people who are single, but we also see people who are single, even though they have certain odds stacked up against them, are still able to overcome and be okay. But imagine how much more balanced and fair it would be if people who are single have perks and benefits to match the level of those who are married. The last point I want to make about the economic side of things, because we touched upon it in season 2 of Grow Up and Raise Your Career IQ, is that wage gap between males and females. Dr. Bella mentions that there's something called a marriage premium and gave the stat married men making 4 to 26% more for being in the same role for the same amount of time as single men. And of course, there's an aspect that we don't see or hear about in that statistic, which is, well, maybe those men were able to negotiate a higher salary. And how do we really measure if they are the same level of productivity, if not more, of those who are single? So those are aspects we don't hear about, but that stat is something, because that's quite a big range. And that extra fund can be beneficial to somebody whether or not they're married. The second key idea was related to conventional wisdom and some of the mythology that is associated with marriage. And we touched upon challenging conventional wisdom when we talked with the KPI guy, Jeff Smith. He encourages us to always question conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom is related to status quo. These are the ideas we have, the beliefs we have, and they must be right because it's how we always did things. And we know that's not true. Marriage superiority has been conventional wisdom for time. That's changing now as there are still people getting married, but we see the numbers changing, and we see that also with having children. And other aspects of conventional wisdom are being challenged and shifted. So this was a key idea when tying in marriage mythology, in particular soulmate mythology. And that's the myth that when I get married, when I find my partner, they're going to be my everything. And we hear this in music, often very romantic, sentimental songs. This person is going to be my everything. They're going to make me whole. The soulmate myth tells us that once you get married, you're going to automatically be more mature. You're going to be wiser. You're going to always be happy because your partner is always going to be attentive to you. You're going to be finally complete because you're incomplete right now being single. And this is partly why there's that judgment that we see. So those of us who are single, you may feel it. And I kind of sense this a bit when referring to that conversation with my childhood friend, that something must be fundamentally wrong with you if you're not married by a certain time. Like maybe there is baggage that you're carrying. Maybe you're just really immature. Maybe you're selfish, or you might be terrified of commitment, but something must be wrong with you. I mean, you're smart, you're reasonably attractive. Something must be wrong with you that I'm not seeing if you're not married. And I think that's connected to the soul mate myth, along with conventional wisdom, that once you get to a certain age, part of growing up is getting married. And then as an extension of that, having children. Now, whenever conventional wisdom is being shaken up a bit and challenged, we see this as a threat to the natural order. And so this is mentioned where people who are fine with being single, so people who are single and happy, are seen as a threat to the status quo. And so there are times when people like women, successful women, are interviewed about their career, and maybe they've chosen to focus on their career, so quote unquote career women, and they do not want to have children. Like they've decided, I don't want children, I'm happy not having children. Then it's common for interviewers to focus on, well, do you regret that decision? Do you feel like you're missing out? And try to push on this idea that you made a mistake by choosing this because something must be wrong with you because your biology states that you're supposed to want to have children. That's how we expand society, by having more people. So whenever there's a challenge to that, it's a threat on the status quo. The last key idea is related to the education that Dr. Bella provided on the history of marriage over time, how marriage has changed over time. And that means looking at the purpose that marriage served previously, along with how the courting process has changed as well. Previously, marriage was community oriented. It served the purpose of elevating social status and extending the lineage of that family. And the process of courting was not hidden. Like now we have things such as Netflix and chill, or when you're going on a date, it's common for people to go on one-on-one dates, whereas before it was a family affair, and that way the families were involved with making this important decision. Maybe they had more leeway and more of a say than they do now. Now it's more secretive. There can still be some involvement from the family, and this depends on the cultures as well. Speaking specifically about the courting process, Dr. Bella also speaks about the wedding ritual being very extravagant. Before, it was a celebration for the family overall, but even now with wedding ceremonies, it's still an involvement of close friends and family, but it's more so focused on the couple, and this couple is now breaking off from the family, their families of origin, and moving on individually to start their own family. And even the honeymoon, previously it wouldn't be such that the couple would go away by themselves, it would be a family affair as well. So hearing about the history of marriage was pretty interesting to learn about. In addition to some of the key ideas that I took away from this book, there are also key takeaways, and they were about the perks associated with marriage, the consequences of marriage superiority, along with the question of why do I do any of what I do? So starting with wanting the perks and the status associated with marriage, I definitely fell into the category of somebody who was really in awe. When one of my friends would get married, I'd be like, you are actually a grown-up. Like, you've met this milestone and it's to be celebrated. So I fell into that category of marital over-glorification, in the sense that I would instantly, when I have a conversation with somebody and I hear that they're married, I view them as, okay, you're responsible. You took that leap and your status as a grown-up has been elevated. And I don't know why that happened, and I didn't give it much thought until reading this book. Another way, and this may be part of feeling brainwashed, is the way that I look at engagement rings. And we hear about it in songs, put a ring on it, and in commercials, get her the most beautiful diamond, she's worth it. The common ritual of the man getting down on their knee and presenting the ring, showing that vulnerability of, I choose you, and the symbolism of that ring, and just even seeing people walking around with a ring, that idea of, I possess this person is taken, they're not on the market, so don't even approach them. This book has challenged some things that I didn't even realize that I've been carrying around, of why do I look at people who are married with such awe? Why do I look at rings with such awe? Why do I want to have a ring to feel that I am of a certain status and I'm of a certain worth? So this book helped me to question those things. As mentioned before, it could be what we're seeing, these images that we're taking in, and things that are shared in TV shows, in the media, and the way that singles are depicted, and the way that articles are written. Everything that we read, everything that is presented to us has an angle and a perspective that they are sharing with us, and the goal is to get us on board, either to educate us, but also oftentimes to get us on board and to share that same perspective. Another takeaway was thinking about the consequences for putting marriage and having a family that branches from that marriage, and prioritizing that way above other relationships. And so, of course, we have different relationships and we give different amounts of time and energy to different relationships, and certain relationships hold more weight in our life than others. But one of the things I got from this book is to prioritize specific relationships, but make time for the other relationships that are important to you, to allow them to grow. This reminds me of a quote from the book, which is talking about how different publications will basically tell people who are married to look down upon their friends who are not married, and to be suspicious of their friends who are not married. An example is an excerpt, which is talking about your pathetic single friends. The website was called The Knot, and the column was called Friends, Keeping Them After You Tie the Knot. And so some of the things that were said was, now that you are married, married friends may joyfully add you to their roster of couples to dine and vacation with, while your union may remind single friends of their lack of success in the relationship department. You may have trouble staying close to single friends after marriage. They may seem distant and jealous. Don't take friends' negative reactions personally. They're likely feeling a bit deserted. If you want to maintain the friendship, call your hurt friend and ask him or her out for coffee or a drink. Your friendship may die a natural death. Don't feel guilty. This happens sometimes. Most married couples gravitate toward other married couples. It makes for a nice, even number and lets you see how other couples handle their relationships. And so basically they're saying, just in terms of single friends, just dump them and don't feel bad about it. They're jealous and hurt because you are such a stunning success at relationships, and they all are dismal failures. If you insist on spending time with them, make it a quick get together for coffee or a drink. And dinners and vacations, those are reserved for couples only. And really, you should just hang out with other couples. So that started on page 69. And so reading that really made me feel like, I hope that my friends who are married do not see me like that. And I understand that some relationships are just naturally going to end. That's just how it goes sometimes. But it has got me thinking with the friends who I've known who maybe I've reached out and tried to set something up and it just didn't happen. Sometimes I will try a few times, and then if it doesn't happen, then I just leave it in their hands, because I'm like, I'm not chasing anybody. But then maybe I need to have more compassion because they are living a different life. but then also trying to identify which friends may very well be thinking this way, and maybe they did want the relationship to end and were relieved when it just kind of ended and we didn't have a conversation about it. If and when I get married, I really hope to not treat my friends in that manner. If anything, I'd hope for us to have a conversation about where we're at and what we are seeking from our relationship, our needs, and how we can meet each other's needs and be supports for each other. Maybe that means we don't meet as frequently, or if we do meet, they have to be at different times of the day for certain reasons, and maybe we can't meet for as long as we did. But I don't want to just cut people out of my life just because I would have gotten married and then demote them from friends. So that really hit. Lastly, as I was reading this, I started to think about the fear-mongering in a lot of articles or in books. Basically, the underlying idea is that it's important to get married because you're going to die alone if you don't. You're going to die a sad, lonely death. You're going to be considered pathetic. Nobody's going to want to spend time with you, and you're not as important. And it's not said like that, but that's the message that comes across. I also found myself getting curious about, how do the people who are important in my life, how do they perceive me? You know, as they see me doing what I'm doing, do they see me as chasing things that are not important? Do they see me as wasting time? Do they see me as less mature because I'm not married and do not have children? So this got me thinking about how other people perceive me. It shouldn't be something that I spend a lot of energy on, but it does have me wondering. The next section is critiques. With this book, I do not have any critiques. My goal with reading this book was to get a sense of, why is marriage glorified, and why does it seem like people who are single are being pressured to step up and get married? And this was a very informative book for that. In terms of what's next for the podcast, we're going to continue to look at some writings about marriage. We're going to look at it from both a secular perspective and also non-secular perspective. Future goal for the podcast is going to look at purpose and relationship maintenance. We did discuss that as a goal previously. And another goal for when we revisit the season of Grow Up and Raise Your Career IQ is going to look at strengthening our financial situations and earning power, because a lot of the benefits from marriage seem to be economic benefits, and it can often be the reason that people may choose to stay in a marriage versus ending one, which may not be a good fit for both parties anymore. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. I would love to hear your feedback of what you gathered from this episode, and if you felt anything was missing, and if there's any future episodes that you would like to see. As always, remember to honor your time and honor your energy. See you next time, Freedom Finders. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Teach Me Freedom podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found it beneficial. Feel free to reach out to us at teachmefreedom2020@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the show on your favorite platform for streaming content. Feel free to comment and leave a 4 or 5 star review if you feel so inclined. Connect with you next time.